You could have been there. It was an absolutely beautiful day. I was working at the Caribbean Beach Resort at Walt Disney World, and I walked backstage to check on something. And then when I went back there, I saw one of my cast members, and she was crying. Now, I immediately go into mama bear mode. Who was mean to you? You point them out, and I will take care of it. And she explained, nobody was mean to her. Instead, there was this guest that was having a really bad day. She wanted to know, could I help? I asked her to bring me over to the guest, and when I see the guest, see that the guest is crying, the cast member's crying, there's a lot of pressure. So I go over and I introduce myself, and I ask the guest, what happened? And she tells me.
Hey, I'm going to tell you something about summer
Okay. That is not what she said. And she tells me, this is a once-in-a-lifetime vacation. My family and I are having an amazing time. We decided to do some souvenir shopping. We went to the mall, and while we were there, somebody cut open my backpack. They took my phone and my camera. Now, all I'm hearing as she's telling me this is that somebody took her memories. So I ask her, are you going to be going back into the parks? No, we're spending a few more days at the hotel, and then we were going to go home. Well, if we give you a couple of tickets to go to Magic Kingdom, do you think you could go for one more day? It's a difficult request, I know. Yeah, we could do that. And so while she's getting her tickets from the concierge cast member, I let her know, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., you're going to City Hall on Main Street, Magic Kingdom, and you're going to meet Brian. While she's getting her tickets, I walk back to my office. And then I call Brian to make sure that he would be working tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Thankfully, he was, and I explained the situation. He said, okay, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. Now, the next morning, promptly at 9, I get a text from Brian. The guest has arrived, and they're going to have an amazing time. Now, at this point, we need to pause. You see, before we can talk about everything that went into place to be able to make this experience happen with the guest, we need to talk about the steps that we had to build on. We're going to talk about the magic of leadership. Now, I have been obsessed with leadership from a very early age. I really wanted to know what made some people worth following, and some people it was more of a struggle. And what I found is that successful leaders consistently take these 5 steps. They manage themselves first, they align their purpose, galvanize their employees, inspire themselves and others, and control their chaos. And when all 5 of these come together, that is how we unlock the magic of leadership. So let's talk about managing yourself first. Now, would it surprise you to know that according to the Mayo Clinic, a leader has more impact on their employees' health than the employee's personal physician? I want to say this one more time. A leader has more impact on an employee's health than the employee's physician. And the first time I saw this, I was like, no, that can't be true. But I'm curious, who has ever been in a toxic workplace? Not just a bad day, right? We know it's more than that. And when we are in those toxic workplaces, it ends up raising our blood pressure, giving us headaches. We're not able to sleep. And at the end of the day, when we leave, we're not like, bye-bye, toxic workplace. I'm going to go home and have a great day. We bring it home with us, and it impacts the relationships that we have with friends and family. And as leaders, we're responsible for that workplace, for that environment. And so my suggestion is that as leaders, we're like the butterfly in the butterfly effect. I'm sure you all heard it. Butterfly flaps its wings in India. Change in wind pressure builds and builds and builds. It becomes a hurricane in the United States. We make small decisions that have unanticipated impacts that we're not prepared for. I experienced this lesson when I first started working at Disney. I was a little bit late to the game. I was in my early 30s, and I was a management intern. I was working at Disney's Animal Kingdom, and on my very first day, I walk in, and there's a cast member. He walks up to me with purpose. He shakes my hand firmly, and he says, hi, my name's George. I'm the retired vice president of marketing for a major organization. I don't need this job. The only reason I'm here is because I want the BARC passes for my grandkids. Not coming in early, not staying late. Don't call me on my day off. If that works for you, great. And if not, you're gone in 6 months. Okay, that is what you needed to know about George. But he was an amazing cast member, and he taught me so much while I was there. Now, one of the things about working at Disney is about every 2 to 4 years, they would do what was called the leadership shuffle. And is where all the leaders would get shifted around to keep things fresh and exciting. This year, the land that I was in happened to be targeted. By the time it was done, all of my colleagues had been shifted and our leader had been shifted. So when it was said and done, I was the most tenured manager there, and I'd only been there for 2 months. To say that there was a lot of stress is a bit of an understatement. Now, one morning, I go into work, super pixie dusted, words are hard, y'all. I'm super excited. I want the cast to try something new. I don't even remember what it was. And as I'm asking them to do this new thing, I'm seeing George, and his body language is getting tense. I don't know what to do with it, so I just keep going. At one point, he stands up, and he always carries a notebook. And he stands up, and he slams his notebook down on his chair, and he looks at me, and he says, I don't have to listen to you. You are just an intern. Your words mean nothing. I did not have that on my bingo card when I woke up that morning. Now, at this point in the story, I'm supposed to say I did this amazing thing, and we all sang Kumbaya, and we hugged, but that's not this story. Instead, I had 2 voices battling for control. I had the voice of my mentor. A leader knows what to do. A leader commands respect. And then I had the voice of my mom. You see, I grew up in the deep south of Louisiana. Being in Fort Worth, we know that there are certain rules that we follow in the deep south. Number 1, be polite, always. Number 2, bless your heart. It's not a compliment. And number 3, respect your elders. You see, George was almost 70. As I mentioned earlier, I was in my early 30s. And so in that moment, I did the only thing I could think of, and I said, okay, meeting's over. Everybody go out. I'll come check on you in a little while. All of the cast go out into the land to begin opening it, and I go outside to collect my thoughts. Afterwards, I go to the bathroom, I wash my face, and I head out into the park. Now, George happens to be the last cast member that I check on. It wasn't on purpose, it was just the way that it fell. And as I go around a corner, I see him, and he sees me, and he starts walking to me with purpose. I get tense. Fool me once, it ain't happening again. Before I can say anything, he looks at me and he says, I am so sorry. Okay, didn't see that coming. Then he explained. When he retired, he promised his wife that they would have balance. Has anybody ever had that conversation with your significant other? When we retire, we will have balance. And he had made agreements with the current leadership team to be able to find that balance. And he loved his job, and he loved what he did. And he didn't want to have to quit. But with all of the changes in leadership, he wasn't sure if they were going to honor the agreements that he had with the prior leaders. And so when all of these changes were happening, and I asked him to do one more thing, it was one thing too many. And in that moment, we met, human to human, having a shared experience over a bad moment. And he taught me a lot about leadership in that moment, that sometimes leaders don't have all the answers. Y'all, we're not perfect. I know that's going to come to a shock for many of you in the room, but it's okay. We can sit in it for a minute. We're not perfect, which means sometimes we're going to make mistakes. Now, many years later, I came across a quote by Viktor Frankl, and he wrote Man's Search for Meaning, and he was a Holocaust survivor. And this quote is that between action and reaction, there is a space. In this space lies our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And that's what managing yourself is about. It's about finding in that space, when something happens to you, who are you going to be on the other side of it, regardless of what just happened. Managing yourself first is finding who you are in that space. Now, this is the beginning of the model because it's the most difficult. But when we start getting it, that's when we get to have some fun. So let's talk about align your purpose. Now, at Walt Disney World, we had almost 80,000 cast members, and we understood our purpose. Our purpose was that we make magic. One of my executives comes in, decides to change everything with one word. We make magic, period. Every guest, every time. Now, for those of us that were guest-facing, it was really easy. We could see the magic that was happening throughout the day. But what about the cast members that aren't guest-facing? How do you ensure a purpose and have it follow all the way from the back to the front? When I worked as a facilitator for the Disney Institute, one of my favorite things to do was give backstage tours. And one of the areas that we would go to was in textile services, where Disney did the laundry. And you may be asking yourself, what's magical about laundry? What was magical was no matter who we spoke to in textile services, when we asked them, what does it mean for you to make magic? They would explain that if a guest comes in at the end of a really long day in the theme parks and pulls back their covers and their sheet has stains, it takes away from the magic. Or if there's a hole, or if they would go to take a shower and their towel smells like mildew. They were able to connect the dots very specifically about how they leaned in to what the purpose is. And so many times when we create purposes for our organizations, it's this big, fluffy, fun saying, but then we don't talk about the behaviors that have to go into it to let us know what that looks like. And so when we're thinking about the purpose, it's aligning your purpose by helping your teams to understand what behaviors do they do that supports this. Because the reality is, it's not real purpose if it skips your payroll, your IT, and your janitorial. Purpose is not for just those individuals that are impacting and engaging with the guests. Purpose is for everyone. You may be wondering, well, how do we reinforce these behaviors? And that brings us to galvanizing your employees. Now, when I was creating this model, I was having a conversation with a mentor, and I got to galvanize, and he was like, galvanize, were you stretching for the G? No, was not. You see, galvanize has two definitions. Many of you may be familiar with this. The first one is to shock or excite someone into taking action. The second is a protective layer of zinc for iron or steel. And what I'm going to suggest is that we excite our teams into taking action through our purpose, but then we're also that protective layer. Because what happens is when we excite somebody into taking action on behalf of our business, you'll see things like innovation and creativity. And who could use a little bit of innovation and creativity with all of the changes that are happening for your organizations? But when we think about innovation and creativity, there's bound to be some missteps. And so when you're having conversations with your teams, what behaviors are you reinforcing and what behaviors are you needing to shift? Now, my favorite model that I've been using for this since I have been in leadership is from the Center for Creative Leadership. It's the SBI model, situation, behavior, impact. Now, we're all pretty good about the situation. If we're gonna give feedback, we'll probably start it with something like Monday during the manager's meeting, or yesterday when you were talking to Mr. Glenn. We're pretty specific about that. Behavior is where it tends to go south. So many times when we're giving feedback, we give the interpretation of a behavior versus the actual behavior. So an interpretation may sound like rude, or they're a leader, or they're friendly. All of those are interpretations of a behavior. The behavior that we would see for friendly would be smiling, eye contact. For rude, it might be rolling their eyes or cutting somebody off. If you tell me that I'm being rude, I can't do anything with that. If you tell me that I rolled my eyes and cut somebody off, I can do something with that. And then impact. When we're talking about the impact, it's the impact to either you, the team, or the organization, not the impact to the person that you're giving the feedback to, because you're assuming that they're going to care about the interpretation of the impact. Versus if you explain the impact is an impact to their team, most of us care about that. And so the next time that you're giving positive or constructive feedback, I highly recommend slowing down and thinking through the behavior. Because it works really well for constructive feedback, but it's extraordinary for positive. So let me give you an example. If I walk by and I'm like, hey, great job today, thank you. You're gonna be like, oh, yeah, you're welcome. And what's gonna be the next question? What did I do, right? What was a good job? Whereas if I walk by and I say, hey, today when Mr. Glenn, our customer, came in, he was really stressed about the increase in prices. I saw that you spent extra time with him and you were explaining the why behind the prices, and when you noticed that that wasn't working, you just got quiet and listened. He was able to feel that empathy, and the impact was that he called me later and shared, even with prices going up, he still wants to stay a customer. And the impact for me personally is I'm really thankful that you're part of the team. If you were receiving feedback, would you have preferred option A or option B? This is an easy one, y'all. B, there we go, absolutely. And so we can see how breaking down the behavior can have a greater impact. Now, practice this for positive, so when it comes to constructive, you're able to do it more easily. Let's talk about inspiring yourselves and others. When I work with executives and leadership teams and we start talking about inspiration, a lot of times I'll see individuals sit back, cross their arms. And when I started digging into why this was happening, it was happening because when people think about inspiration, they think about Steve Jobs rolling out the iPod or Oprah Winfrey, you get a car and you get a car and you get a car. And the reality is that inspiration isn't Steve Jobs or Oprah Winfrey. Inspiration is made up of hundreds of little moments. Inspiration is showing up. And so I want you to take a moment. In the very beginning, you were asked to think of a leader that inspires you. And I want you to take just a second to think about what were some of the behaviors that that leader did. When I ask this question, many times I get responses like, they listened to me when I was having a bad day. Or when I did a misstep, they took the time to have a conversation with me. They held me accountable and they made me better. All of these pieces, when we think about who inspires us, we can see that it's these small moments in time. It's not these great big actions. And chances are the person that you're thinking of, you probably haven't told them how much they inspire you, which means there's somebody on your team that you have also inspired that has probably not told you. As leaders, when we are inspired, we're able to pass it along to others. But then how do we get the time to do that? And that brings us to control your chaos. Now, as a leader at Disney, there are certain expectations. And when I was a restaurant manager, I ran out of hamburger buns. There's an expectation that if you're in a restaurant that serves 4 items, hamburgers, hot dogs, chicken nuggets, salads, you're not gonna run out of hamburger buns. Which is why I found myself panicking. Because when Mom, Dad, and little Johnny come in, and the only thing that little Johnny will eat was hamburgers, and I had to explain that I was out, a lot of my guests look like this. And I got called every name in the book that night. But you know what? They weren't wrong. Because there's so many things that we do throughout the day that pulls our attention. And when it's pulling our attention, it doesn't allow us to take care of the things that we know is a problem. I knew our ordering process was a problem, but I didn't have time. Now, when we think about time and the management of time normally involves things like calendars, or to-do lists. But we don't talk about energy enough. When we think about energy, energy is we have a battery that's inside of us. And our goal at the end of the day is to have 10 to 20% battery life left over. We don't want to be 100% because then we're not going to sleep. We want just a little bit. But most of us, when we get home, we find that we have nothing left over. And then we still have to do bedtime routines, dinner, homework, and all of the things. So when we think about combining energy and time, we need to recognize that time is not a renewable resource. We get 24 hours in the day, just like everybody else. But energy is. And so the balance happens when we're able to look at time and energy and bring them together. So an example of this is my energy is lowest at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I know if I have a client that wants to hire me for a keynote or a training, then I'm going to try really hard not to talk to them at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm going to try to do it at 10 when my energy's higher. But if that is the only time they can meet, I'm going to go for a walk beforehand so that I recharge my battery so I have more energy to give. So when we think about time, time is what we're going to do with the 24 hours. When we think about energy, energy is how we're going to do it. We don't have full control over the time and how our energy is spent, but we have more control than what we think. These are one of the things that we can control. Now, my dad is one of my superheroes. He quit drinking when I was in first grade, and he taught me more about focusing on what I can control than anybody else. Because you see, one of the side effects of growing up as a child of a recovering alcoholic was I went to a lot of AA meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous. And in those meetings, I would hear the adults, and they would be talking, and there was always one thing that they would say at every meeting. And that one thing was, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I asked him one time, when you're having a bad day, I see you saying this over and over and over again. Why? And he shared that words have power. And these words remind him that the amount of energy that he has and the amount of control that he has is very small. And if he takes that energy and he puts it into areas he can actually control, then he has a greater impact. Whereas if he takes that energy and he pours it into a black hole of nothingness, he has no impact and he's wiped out, and a difficult situation gets even worse. And when we think about controlling our chaos, that's what it means, is focus on those things that we can actually control and let go of the things that we can't. Now, we're about to wrap up. We're about to go back to Magic Kingdom. But before we do that, if you would like the first 3 chapters of my book, Unlocking the Magic of Leadership, which is all about managing yourself first, you can scan the QR code on the screen. If you would like to scan the QR code, the very first screen, if you don't want to be part of my email list, there's a little box, uncheck it, all right? So scan the code and then set your phones down. And I will ask you to fill out the survey a little bit later. When you fill out the survey, you'll get the first 3 chapters of the book. But before we go back to Magic Kingdom, I'd like to turn it over for any questions. Does anybody have any questions that you would like to ask? I would call on y'all, but I can't see you.
Who do you consider the greatest leader to have ever lived?
The greatest leader to have ever lived. Man, you aren't, I was expecting a softball question. Greatest leader to have ever lived. It depends on the situation. Because that's the thing about leadership. The one question that I get asked consistently is, what is a great leader? And it always depends on the situation. Because a great leader that's going to be at an accounting firm is going to look different than a great leader at a theme park. So there is not one specific answer. I can tell you the greatest leader that I've ever had in my life, and it was the combination of my mom and dad. So my mom was bipolar, and my dad was a recovering alcoholic. And watching them grow up, I saw my dad get his GED, and both of my parents graduate college while having small kids. And so the lessons that they instilled in me was, It sucks, get over it, get it done. And I think there's a lot of value in that as leaders, is helping people move beyond the it sucks part into the, all right, now let's get it done. It's a good question.
Summer, what advice do you have for people in companies or organizations that work for a poor leader or work for somebody who's fallen short of the idea?
Yeah, so the question is, what advice do I have for somebody who's working in an organization that has a poor leader? And this is the second most popular question that I get. And when we think about leadership, leadership in its truest form is an agreement between a group of individuals. It's a social process. In not its truest form, it comes down to power. A leader has power, the employees have less power. And so we think that leaders are the only ones that can fire individuals. But as employees, we can fire our leaders as well. How do we do that? We quit. We find a different job. So if you have a relationship with somebody that you think can take the feedback, giving feedback helps, because what happens is leaders get caught in an echo chamber where they're surrounded by people, and the further up in an organization you go, the more likely this is to happen, where you get surrounded by people that are going to tell you what you want to hear. And so many leaders are desperate to know what's truly happening in their organizations. But I would say offer feedback gently the first time in something that's not really that big of a deal. And so that way you can see how are they going to respond. If they take it well, continue giving the feedback. If they don't take it well, then recognize in this situation, that's a risk that you're going to have to take. I have continued to push to give feedbacks to poor leaders to the detriment of my career. And other times I pushed and it helped escalate my career because I was willing to speak the truth. It's a personal decision for everybody, because once you throw power into the mix, it gets a little tricky. Any other questions? I don't think so. I think we're all ready to hear what happened in Magic Kingdom. All right. So come back to me. We're in Magic Kingdom. We just heard from Brian saying that the guest had arrived. Now the entire day goes by, and I am anxiously awaiting to find out what happened. The day goes by, he calls me the next day, and he starts telling me about what they had done. You see, he had taken one of his cast members that was a photographer and sent the cast member throughout the park with the family. That family got once-in-a-lifetime photos on places like Space Mountain and in restaurants, places that you normally don't get a lot of pictures. As the pictures were coming in, Brian's looking at them and pulling the best pictures. His favorite one was a picture of mom and dad walking hand in hand down Main Street with a castle in the front. Now at around noon, he decided to amp it up a little bit. So he called the cast member and said, bring the family to the castle. When the family got to the castle, Brian opened a door, and there along the wall was every single character in the park that day. We had Mickey and Minnie and Peter Pan and Tinkerbell and everybody in between. And the family stood still, and the characters stood in line to take a picture with the family. Now, when that was done, sent them back out into the park, and around 9 p.m., Brian's like, all right, 12 hours of magic is probably enough. So he brings them back to City Hall, and he has photo albums prepared with all of the photos of the day, and CDs with the ones that didn't fit in the photo albums. As mom is flipping through the photo albums, she comes to one, and it's her favorite character, Cinderella. And Cinderella has personalized and autographed that photo to the family. She passes the photo album to Dad, and in Brian's word, she hugs him so tight that he can't breathe. But he knows in that moment, we made magic. Now, I know as you're hearing this story, there's at least one or two of you that's thinking, you know, Summer, this is a great story. Love it. And you have Mickey Mouse in your back pocket. I don't have Mickey Mouse in my back pocket. But you see, Mickey isn't the magic. The magic is in having managers that are able to manage themselves first, having a purpose where everybody is aligned, having your employees galvanize and understanding what behaviors lean into that purpose. having individuals that are inspired, and having individuals that have controlled their chaos so that they have time to do this. So I would like to leave you with 2 final questions. What is your magic, and what are you going to do with it?